Hey everyone. So before today's episode, I just wanted to give you a quick heads up that today's episode, because it's about cultural and moral panics, it does involve some discussion of some disturbing things, including the sexual abuse of children. We just want to put that out there at the beginning of the episode. This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
I'm Sarah Marshall, and I am the host and creator of The Devil You Know.
First of all, I'm so happy you're here. It's so nice to see you. And I'm so excited about the new show.
I'm so happy to be here. I felt like a special sense of kinship with you ever since I had you on You're Wrong about a couple years ago when we talked about how horrible email is. That felt incredibly cathartic, and it still does.
Same. Well, and when I asked for questions for this show, I can't tell you how many people were, first of all, just super excited and just basically wrote a question that was like, I don't have a question, I'm just excited.
That's so exciting. I already feel like Chris Farley in the SNL sketch that was a parody of the Cher hair care infomercials in the early 90s, where she's like, Lori Davis is like, I'm getting letters from so many women and they're all excited, and how that was just, it was, I don't know. I find it, I could go to sleep to that thing. It's just so comforting.
And then others, as we'll talk about, that are like, okay, well, here, let me reference all of these different places where Sarah has talked about moral panics to try to ask a question. So there are people who are very, very deep in the universe. So that's great.
I think that if there's one thing my career is proof of, it's that you can become erroneously seen as an expert in something by simply talking about it for 7 years straight. Because I'm not an expert in the Satanic Panic. I've read about it a lot. I have 2 shelves of books on it, which is a lot, and a lot of them were out of print and I had to order them. So I put time into it. But I feel very humbled and appreciative and lucky about how much people want to hear what I have to say about the Satanic Panic. Because I think the best I can do is use myself to let listeners hear people who went through it.
The reason you're here is as a jumping off point to talk about your new show, which is called The Devil You Know. So can you tell us just a little bit about it?
Oh, so it's, I'm so happy to be here talking about it with you. It is very much a culture study. And it's a show that I am putting out this fall. It's out right now from CBC Podcasts. It's a podcast that tries to really get at what it was like to live through the Satanic Panic of the 80s by talking to people who witnessed it, who were victimized by it, and who experienced it in some ways we haven't heard about yet. Kind of starting in media res with the case of a woman who was the new stranger in town, the young lady who was from the city. And in this case, she went to a small town in Kentucky to try and teach photography as an arts educator. She had a grant at the time. And
an arts grant? What a world.
Oh, no. Yeah. Slash federal funding to keep the Satanists out of your town. Am I right, ladies?
Yes. Yeah.
And also the fact that there were a lot of, specials by great people like Geraldo at the time. This is the late 80s by this point, that are just, talking about the idea of satanic cults roving the landscape as if it's fact and as if it's been fact for a while. A rumor started that she was in town to sacrifice blonde, blue-eyed virgins. And so she literally fled for her life. And so we get to start with that and then talk about what were the origins of the Satanic Panic as something that was believed in, not by fringy people and not initially by fringy people either, in the way of QAnon stuff that has crept its way in from the fringes and into Congress, but from the beginning by people very much at the forefront of their professions and very much kind of setting the agenda in American psychiatry and law. And so that's what we're going for.
So we're going to have our listener read the first question because this backtracks us just slightly, but then allows us to try to connect the dots between the Satanic Panic of then and other panics, cultural and social panics of now. So let's hear from Jen.
Can you briefly explain the Satanic Panic of the 80s and or 90s? I'm pretty sure I've heard Sarah talk about this on other podcasts, but I fear I was not alive when this happened. How is this phenomenon connected to any cultural panics before it and or any cultural panics afterwards?
I bet you have heard me talk about it before.
Bet she has.
Yeah.
How did you get first interested in it? Like, what was your first exposure? And you were like, this is a
Hmm.
rich text.
I first read about the Satanic Panic because in the early 2010s, when we were all listening to Stomp Clap Hey music and wearing blazers to the club famously, people really did that. That's not a rumor. Um, I was reading a lot of articles on the Texas Monthly website because Texas Monthly, at least at the time, had like a very generous policy in terms of posting great long form journalism just up on the website without a paywall.
And
Do you
so
remember this?
fucking good, right?
Yeah.
And it would be like, here's this long form article from 1981 that's a total banger.
Yeah, with no typos in it. And it's like 14,000 words long. And you're like, well, I've got an hour-long bus ride because I live with my parents, because I make $1,100 a month, you know? And so, because I'm an adjunct, again, this is a tale of academia, really. And so I was reading just everything I could find. I think like the best American true crime reporting probably ever has happened in Texas Monthly over the years.
Agreed.
And so I remember reading articles about the case of Fran and Dan Keller, I think whose case was under appeal at the time because they were victims of a classic satanic panic case. Fran ran a daycare center in the Austin area, and it was kind of a very, throughout the 80s, of kind of frequently replicated sort of carrier for wrongful conviction where a parent would become concerned because at the time, you know, we had the initial case, the McMartin trial in Southern California in the early 80s, and then this got into national news. And then it was something that any parent with a child in daycare would at least, I think, have a flickering thought of like, what if my child's daycare has been infiltrated by Satanists who are sexually abusing toddlers and satanic rituals? Something that the news is telling me is happening. Like, not saying it could be happening, but like, you know, in the beginning, the media came out very strongly on the side of like, cops say this is going on. And yeah, it probably is.
Well, and at that time, I think it's so important for us to underline that, like, if something was in the news and, like, also on Geraldo, which,
Yeah.
you know, most homes was there every single day at 3 p.m.,
Mm-hmm.
like that, Sally Jesse, like, these shows really
Yeah.
felt like,
Oprah
yes,
in
they were
her
a little bit
youth.
salacious, but they weren't necessarily, like, they weren't untruthful. Does that make sense? Like,
Right.
they
They're
were
being
trusted
presented as
voices.
part of news, you
Yeah.
know? And I think
Yeah.
it was, I don't know. I don't know if you could, I think that you just can't expect much media sophistication from the American people. And that is sad, but it
Yeah.
is also part of our charm that we are willing to believe anything.
Yes. Is there ever a time when there's no cultural panic? I'm just trying to think about this. Like
Well,
that.
I think that there are so many people all talking to each other now that it's like the
Yeah.
common cold where like somebody's going to have it.
Yep.
Stanley Cohen, the sociologist, coined the term moral panic, I believe in 1972. He kind of laid out the set of criteria that it's basically about normative society finding reasons to protect itself by overestimating a threat coming to it from a countercultural group or an out group. He was looking
Mm.
initially at panic over mods in a seaside town in England in the late 60s, which is very
Can you
funny
define
to
what
think this is
mods
where this
are?
began.
Just so for people who don't know what
I
they're.
mean, barely. I would say just, you know, people who are like listening to a bit of rock and roll and
Yes.
like looking at Twiggy, you know, and are, I don't know, probably engaging in some light violence as British white males tend to.
Yeah. So countercultural in some capacity. And that can mean so many different things.
Yeah, I think this is a thing that normative culture, mainstream culture, and kind of places within culture where power is located like to believe about themselves. I think partly because it's an excuse for exercising dominance, right? Because
Yeah.
if you're saying, I'm insisting on controlling everyone who's different from me because I don't like it when people are different from me, that makes you seem like kind of an unreasonable person. But if they're
Mhm.
like the significant threat to you and your children and your wife, then it becomes different. And you're not overreacting, you're heroic. And I
Right.
think that, you know, I mean, there's something very interesting today about how Christianity in America, which is one of the most probably the most politically powerful that a religion has ever been, like including the Holy Roman Empire, has this absolutely obsessional martyr complex, which,
Yep.
the kind of our ongoing satanic panic certainly plays into. And it's like, you guys have not been oppressed in like thousands of years. You've got to calm down. Like,
But
why do you,
you have
yeah,
to continuously identify the interloper that is not like, it's not like you can just let the interloper hang out, right? Like
right.
pluralism is not possible. It's like it
Yeah.
also has to be forcefully rejected because it's like a pathogen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so talking about kind of the timelessness of moral panics, I mean, something that is almost too obvious to notice about the satanic panic is that it's basically like medieval blood
Yes.
libel, and this
Yeah.
idea that, in the Middle Ages, certainly I think this comes up in actually Chaucer, you would accuse Jews of eating babies just because that's kind of the quickest, I feel like the fastest way to demonize another human being,
Yep.
and to imply not only, violence, but like operating on a logical level that is completely divorced from anything that you or I would ever do. So I feel like in the 80s and now we used kind of the basic moral panic template that had been in use at least since the Middle Ages, and which today I think we would understand as basically a meme, where it's something that's easy to replicate by
Yep.
different groups of people in different times, but you have to feel a little bit threatened by somebody and willing to experience or create a certain amount of fear in order to then create social controls that basically stop the group that you're afraid of and are permitting yourself to be even more afraid of, like life and death afraid of, allow you to control them further. And so in this case, if you can also draw a direct line, the satanic panic starts in the early 80s and is kind of brewing in the late 70s. And that's the time of the failure of the ERA and women's lib and gay liberation.
And like a time when the Republican Party and conservatism has never been stronger, right? Like arguably, like compared to now, like we're further to the right, but like the margins by which Reagan won, those sorts of things. The Culture Study Podcast is sponsored by Miracle Made. If you wake up sweaty, freezing, or just uncomfortable, oftentimes the culprit is actually the temperature in your bedroom. And the temperature can really ruin your sleep or it can make your sleep fantastic. So I recently switched to Miracle Made sheets. I love them. I am such a temperature person. Like I'm that person who's like constantly trying to figure out this like special mix of fans and window open and the right blankets. And I feel like I just found like the missing piece. And it's these sheets. They're inspired by NASA technology and they use silver infused temperature regulating fabric to help you sleep perfectly all night long. The other thing that the silver does, it's antibacterial. So if you let your dog sleep on your bed, like I do, it reduces the bacteria that they're keeping on your bed. So Miracle Made sheets stay cleaner and fresher up to 3 times longer than regular sheets. That means fewer odors, fewer wash cycles, and way less laundry, which I always love. They also are super smooth. I am picky about sheets. I'm not one of those people who's like, I will only have the 1020 count sheet or whatever. Like I'm not that picky, but I really like a soft sheet that doesn't start to pill like the second time that you wash it. And these are very smooth and ridiculously comfortable. Right now, you too can upgrade your sleep and give the gift a better rest. So go to trymiracle.com/culture to try Miracle Made sheets today. You'll save over 40%. And when you use promo code culture, you'll get an extra 20% off plus a free 3-piece towel set. They make an amazing gift, and with a 30-day money-back guarantee, there is no risks. So that's trymiracle.com/culture, code culture at checkout. Thanks to Miracle Made for sponsoring this episode. Today's episode is sponsored by OneSkin. So I've been thinking a lot about simplifying routines. I like having steps that are very straightforward, that I can do every single day that I'm not like, oh, I'm running out of this thing. And that just ruins the entire routine to run out of like one of 17 serums that I'm using. And that's part of why I really like OneSkin is that it's for people who don't want to have 17 serums. It's for people who are new to skincare as well, who know that they want like some sort of moisturizer or some sort of under eye cream that just does its job and you don't have to think about it. The thing that makes OneSkin different is this OS1 peptide. It's the first ingredient proven to target senescent cells, which are the root cause of wrinkles, crepiness, and loss of elasticity. And these results have now been validated in 5 different clinical studies. OneSkin is also safe for sensitive skin. That's part of the reason I think it's really good for people who are new to skincare and who have been turned off by trying other things that have made their skin inflamed or just like made them feel like skincare isn't for them. OneSkin products are free from over 1,500 harsh or irritating ingredients. It's dermatologist tested and has been awarded the National Eczema Association Seal of Acceptance. OneSkin also just launched their limited edition holiday set, which includes the Nightly Rewind gift set. Okay, so in this set, you get the moisturizer that I just talked about. You get the new peptide lip mask, and you get the sculpting gua sha tool, which Melody has the best description for it. It's a piece of stone that you rub onto your face. It feels really nice. Each element is designed to work together as your body enters its natural nightly repair mode, helping renew skin at the cellular level for a stronger, smoother, and more youthful looking complexion. Try OneSkin for 15% off using code CULTURE at oneskin.co/culture. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support the show and tell that we sent you. Okay, so this is actually a great segue to our next question. This comes from Allison, and Melody's going to read it.
What makes a cultural or moral panic different from conspiracy theories or just misinformation? Are they different parts of the same spectrum? Does persistent misinformation grow up to be a panic? Does a panic live on as a conspiracy after its glory days are over? Historically, I'd say that it seems like cultural panics are treated as legitimate concerns worthy of attention and consideration and possible action, while the other kinds of beliefs are disregarded as fringe or kooky. But in the I'm just asking questions era, it seems like the boundaries are fuzzier. Are we just rolling through the cycles of cultural panics much faster now? Sorry, this might be several questions in a trench coat.
We love several questions in a trench coat.
Oh,
It's our
yeah.
favorite kind of question. First, I want to plug the episode that we had about conspiracy theories about a year ago. It was excellent. It was especially about like how women get into conspiracy theories. So if listeners haven't heard that one, it's a great companion to today's conversation. So Sarah, what are your thoughts on this?
Okay, Allison, I don't know. I feel like you've provided a lot of great answers within your question as well, which is most exciting. Because I love the idea of like a moral panic is what conspiracy theories grow into.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anyone has ever described it that way that I've read, but that feels right.
Yeah.
You know, because anyone can develop a conspiracy theory, which you can do all by yourself, whereas you need at least one other person to conspire with, I guess. But I don't know, I feel like the interesting thing about conspiracy theories too is that they often come to function like conspiracies themselves, right? Where you're like trading information with people who you want to be in the know, or you're like,
Yep.
you know, approaching some teenage girl who's clearly coming down from mushrooms because you want to tell them about chemtrails, which is how I first heard about chemtrails. I was the girl on mushrooms. And even then I was like, leave me alone. You don't smell good.
Or and even the other part that Allison mentions, which is that sometimes a moral panic dwindles down into a conspiracy theory. So
Right.
something like the satanic panic, which I think people like, there are still people who think that this is a real thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're called Baptists.
But yes.
But, well, because like I could tell you, like, I could be like, listen, I've got, or to quote, so I don't have to come up with one, to quote, so I married an axe murderer. Let's say that like the world is run by the Illuminati, which includes the Pope and Colonel Sanders. And if he's not running the world, then how does he have a secret history of herbs and spices that makes you crave it fortnightly? And you could be like, okay, that's kind of compelling. Focus more on the Illuminati thing, because I don't think you're going to teach people to be afraid of Colonel Sanders. You know, like that one is probably not going to take off. That's my own little conspiracy theory. Although I don't know. I think we could probably if we freaked out enough about Colonel Sanders, get KFC to change the logo. Not by alleging that it's racist, of course, but with, like with, what was it, Procter and Gamble that had to change their logo because enough people freaked out that it was satanic.
Yeah.
So there had been a lot of media in Christian kind of publishing in the 60s and early 70s about how the counterculture was actually satanic in all its forms, and how like horoscopes were satanic as well as just outright Satan worship, that you didn't have to know that you were into Satan to be there. And that was, not catching on in mainstream anxieties in that time period. It took a while, but at the same time, we had movies like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist, which had this kind of what if quality to them.
Well, and also gave like a visual like prompt almost of what this would look like, right? It has to you have to make it imaginable in some way.
That's true. Yeah. And it becomes something you feel like you've seen because you saw it in a movie. And actually in Michelle Remembers, which is the book that kind of helps to be the initial domino that then starts kind of this chain reaction of all these daycare cases, because it's
Can you talk about what the daycare cases are?
Yeah. Well, so yeah, kind of like we talked about with the Fran and Dan Keller case. So this starts in McMartin, which is a preschool in Southern California. It's in Manhattan Beach, and basically a parent who later turns out to be an unreliable witness for a few reasons, but basically pertaining to untreated mental health issues, comes to suspect that her son, who's 2, has been sexually abused, and specifically that he's been a victim of forms of abuse that very young children, we know now statistically, like very rarely experience. Like child abuse is much, much, much more common than I think anyone wanted to realize in the early 80s, which is when we began to really talk about it. Certainly sexual abuse was much more common than mainstream culture had attempted to come to grips with. But once you begin to study it, you do begin to realize that there are certain trends, and what the trends don't support is this idea of children being abused in a ritualistic fashion, being abused in a way that's religiously significant for the abuser, and then the forms of sexual abuse that were being alleged by this initial parent, again, are possible, but would be statistically very unusual. But nobody had really studied it yet, and so there was this sense that like kind of anything could be going on.
Yep.
And so, in this case, the police didn't have best practices for how to keep an investigation from getting contaminated, and how to forensically question very young children about how they had potentially been abused. And so this, plus the idea within culture, which is very much bolstered by Michelle Remembers, which is a book that came out in 1980 of alleged nonfiction about some very dodgy therapy where a woman claimed to have recovered memories, and does seem to have had memories basically implanted in her by her therapist, of being tortured ritualistically by a satanic cult. And then Satan at the end comes out and is a character in the book himself, and he talks about his plan for the 80s, and the book comes out in 1980. So I imagine if you're reading it, you're like, oh, Jesus Christ, we got to get on this thing. Like it's already happening.
Yes.
So there's this sense of, real legitimacy that's given to this fear by people in authority, I think, because for many reasons. And one is this thought of like, well, we don't know how any of this works, and we don't want to dismiss it out of hand, because what if there's any chance that it is going on?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it reminds me, though, of like when the unimaginable happens, in this case, the sexual abuse of a small child. How do you make sense of it? And one way that you make sense of it is through like writing a melodrama on television, right? Or a book that makes sense of how these things happen and ascribes like a very clear perpetrator, victim, all those things, right? And we don't want to, people really don't want to think about the fact that so much of this happens within the home. And then the other way is like the book does it, but then also all of these other texts that are saying, well, this is Satanists. Like this abuse is happening because of Satanists instead of examine thyself. But it's a very easy way to make it imaginable. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it really does. And I think that there's something about this period when it feels like we've had, and this is just this is my theorizing, right? This is what I have these conversations with my mom where I like present this argument. She's like, yeah, maybe. And I'm like, no, it's not. We're talking sociology here. So it's just anything is like, yeah, kind of. Who can say? Whereas she
Who
was a
can
doctor.
say?
So it's like, well, we can't give the patient the wrong drugs,
Yeah.
We can't give the long 20th century the wrong medication. We have to figure out exactly what it is. But my conjecture basically is that, we had these advances in women's rights.
Yeah.
Women were running marathons and writing checks. What's next?
Right.
This idea that is being said out loud in more media than probably ever before, that marriage is kind of a raw deal for women, and that also just taking spousal abuse into account, which we're also just beginning to talk about. It kind of makes you wonder if maybe women would be able to parent more successfully if they weren't dependent on any drunk they happened to marry when they were 18 years old to not abuse them and to continue to support them financially, because God knows things were rigged so that they couldn't make a living because World War II was over. And so I feel like the Satanic Panic is just this, serves many functions, but one of the many things it does to crush a subculture that's growing strength is to drive women back into the home where, statistically, if they're going to experience abuse and if their child is going to experience abuse, there's a very good chance it's going to be there and a very low chance that it's going to happen in the forest where the Satanists are supposed to be.
Yep.
That it allows frequently scary men to continue their reign unquestioned because there's Satanists out there.
Right. And it, like, as you said earlier, it reinscribes the powerful. Like, it wasn't like men's power was actually under threat. Patriarchy was not legitimately under threat. There was just some like tiny gains for women, and that had to be deflected by a reinscription of like the male home in control.
And I would say looking around today that there's like a sense of the massive fragility of those in power, looking at the reasonable questions of oppressed subcultures as part of this, because you have kind of the Christian right running America now and acting very afraid of everything. And it's like, everyone's afraid of you, and rightly so, I might add. We had, what was it, Mike Johnson came to, I don't know if he came to Portland or just heard about it, but he said that the World Naked Bike Ride in Portland was like the scariest thing he'd ever seen. And it was like, really? I have friends who met there and then got married.
It's actually really goofy and great,
Yeah, I mean, you do hope that people are wearing enough sunscreen, but I wouldn't call that the scariest thing I'd ever seen. I mean, I don't know if you've seen that part in Deep Blue Sea where that guy gets his arm bit off. I would call that the scariest thing that I've seen.
Okay, so for the second half of the episode, we're going to talk a little bit about more contemporary moral panics. And this question comes from Ellie, and we got a lot like it. So we wanted to read it, and then we'll talk a little bit about the other questions we received.
Why trans people? People were reasonably accepting of trans people in 2015, and now suddenly we have this horrible gender-critical transphobia. How? Why? What has caused this?
So the other question, I mean, just a lot of like, why are people fucking flipping out over the existence of trans people? But then also questions in the line of like, there are these moms on the freaking playground who keep saying like, well, schools have litter boxes now because kids are identifying as cats, right? Which is a way to discipline anyone who's thinking about like fluid gender identity or changing gender identity or that sort of thing, right? So what do you see going on here?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm so glad so many people asked that, because it is just, very infuriating. And it is, I don't know, nice to be reminded that a lot of this cultural backlash, I think, was somewhat invented for political gains by the right in this country, right? Because the idea that Republicans, while taking all of your money and your quality of life, are also going to protect you from a trans child in the bathroom, something that has never been a problem for anyone in human history.
Or trans kids on the sports team, which is so statistically small, and like they're not taking away your kids' medals, whatever.
Yeah.
Who cares? Who cares?
And I think implicit in that is the fear of like, what if your child has a trans friend and then is less limited in their beliefs about who they can have in their community than you are. And that would be the really scary thing.
Right.
Like, it would be bad if your child was victimized in some theoretical way that no one is willing to define. But it'd be even worse if they learn something, and the demonization of children learning things feels like such a big part of it.
Right. And that's always the big thing too, is that the kids don't freaking care.
Right. That kids will kind of be friends with anyone as long as, they're not a jerk about when to give over the video game controller, if that's still something kids fight about. And something that I just personally think about is that, I don't have kids, and I'm a very happy cat lady in these United States, and therefore also destroying America, which is great because I never thought I had that much power. And if I do have it, then, to quote Veep, I must be using it very discreetly. But if I had kids, something I would find very stressful is that I watch YouTube 48 hours a day. It's just all my favorite stuff is on it. And what is so worrying about children's YouTube is that you can see how the algorithm, it seems conclusively in an intentional way, as with Facebook and boomers, is geared towards showing kids things that will disturb and upset them. Mm-hmm. Because apparently that makes them watch it more and everyone can make a little bit more money.
Yeah.
There are very scary things trying to reach our kids all the time, but none of them are kids on the soccer team.
Yeah. Do you think that this is, if we're getting very broad strokes about, these panics arrive when power is under threat? There was a moment, right? And it's 2015 when, statistically, if we look at polls that talk about, how people feel about accepting trans people, there is a moment in 2015 where, the numbers are much higher than they are now.
Wow.
That, yes, the Republican Party has engineered this as, a flashpoint, as something to be concerned about, as, a problem that doesn't exist, but that they have insisted on as a problem. But also just this idea that, America is changing. So how do we react to that? It's Make America Great Again, and part and parcel of that is, we have to demonize trans people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I don't know. I love the way you just put that. What is it? That moral panics arrive when power is questioned. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's interesting, too, is that aligns really well with 2020, where we had, these massive protests.
Yep.
I think there's maybe kind of a spectrum of people where you're politically engaged and kind of processing information, and you're yeah, I'm thinking thoughts. Sometimes I disagree with things, but I don't make it my personality. And we all try to be there, or we don't all try to be there, but I would like to try to be there. And I welcome you here to this zone when we're behaving ourselves. And then sometimes you're you're just not paying attention for whatever reason. And then there's the side of the spectrum, I think, or the hoop or whatever it is, where you're aware of what's going on, but not in a way that's helpful to you or anybody else. And where things seem personally upsetting to you in an interesting way that would seem to relate more to your personal baggage than anything else. And it's interesting to me that in this time of spring, summer of 2020, really questioning infrastructure and saying should the police really be able to kill whoever they want? A topic that America kept returning to and not coming up with an answer to. And it feels like this time of really reasonably questioning hierarchy, that we also got the panic that really, I think, brought our satanic panic of the 2020s off to a strong start of don't put your child in a mask. Masks are a conspiracy so that your child can be abducted because you'll be unable to recognize someone who you probably dressed today because you can't see the lower half of their face.
And they'll be abducted for sex trafficking specifically.
Yes. Yeah. As will you probably, Kelly.
The details have to change slightly, right? They can't just replicate a past social panic. It has to be
right. We can't say
different.
Satanists will sacrifice him in the old quarry. That would be ridiculous. It has to be he's going to put in a shipping container.
Yes.
Somehow. Which I also I find it also interesting that in this time, and again, this is where I'm it might be a bit much to theorize this, but it at least shows that I was paying attention when I was in grad school, of this time of like putting pressure on the idea of like, no, like what if America is basically rooted in white supremacy, and if you're white, you have benefited from it in some way, even if you never thought about it before, which I get that that's a threatening idea somehow. But that in response to that, it seems like white women, especially in the past, 5-10 years, have like really locked into this idea of like human trafficking. It's happening, and it's happening to me, and I will be put in a shipping container. And it's like, why are you so upset about being told about the slave trade, which did involve people literally being shipped from Africa to build the White House and stuff, or at least for their children to do that and their children's children. And this idea of like, I can't get off the theory that like we were so in denial of having to learn about slavery that like white women in suburbia invented the theory that we in fact are going to become enslaved.
But it also psychologically makes absolute sense, right? It's just like an incredible avoidance of shame.
Yeah. You're like, don't tell me about slavery. I could become enslaved at any minute. Anytime I buy craft supplies, I'm very brave.
Right. And also just this like age-old like for white lady fragility too, right? Like that is always the actual demographic that's most under threat instead of the demographics that are most under threat.
Yeah. And it's like this thing, I think, where like that white womanhood historically, at least in the United States, is like your ability to be relevant is so tied to your ability to be a potential victim that anytime the focus is off of you as a potential victim, you can see people being like, hey, excuse me, I've invented a crime that I'm now the victim of, and I think we should all talk about it.
Right. Like when it's kind of like everyone has to relate it back to their own experience in some way, right? Like, so if someone's talking about a way that they've been marginalized or like experienced like really serious like ramifications of systemic racism, you'll have someone be like, well, do you know that the Irish used to be discriminated against? Right? Or like, it was hard when I moved to a big town and like my accent it kind of marked me. And like, yes, those things are hard, but that's not what we're talking about.
Right.
Like, you don't have to this constant recentering onto the self, which is incredibly American. The resistance of thinking about social structures and the insistence on thinking about the vulnerability of the self and the family unit, that vulnerability, instead of like our vulnerability as a society.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's like, you can maybe see the moral panic in some ways as like a resistance to empathy, right? Because if we're having kind of moral panic today, partly in response to social justice movements, which I would say I think that's reasonable to say at this point. Yeah. Yes. I think there's a discomfort that comes when you're being called on to empathize in a way you're not prepared for, or in a way that you feel implicates a system that you've benefited from. And I feel like it's possible to push through that, and many people do. And sometimes you don't. And I feel like if you don't, then maybe it becomes necessary for the psyche to soothe itself by saying, I am in no way negatively implicated in the world as it's existing and being lived by marginalized people. I, in fact, am at risk by them all the time, and I need to protect myself, and I don't even need... And the thing about the way the moral panics function too, I think, is that you don't even have to think about your perceived enemy as human, because they're being accused of things that you could never conceive of doing.
I know. That's like, well, and to me, it strikes me always as profound odds with like the lived deep, like I'm talking Anabaptist, like Protestant tradition, which is that the world is fucking evil, right? Like if you actually live deep within those faiths, like we are a fallen world. Everything is bad. You have to live with that badness. Like you look at stories in the Bible, and before you get to like some of the happy shit that's happening in the New Testament, like things are bad and then things get worse and it's your fucking fault. Like you live within that culture of like of sin, essentially. But the way that we have narrativized it, I think in contemporary America, especially like within these panics, is like you can empathize. Like a white middle-class person is led to understand that they can empathize with someone who has been historically marginalized through like a text that ultimately allows them to still be the hero in the story, right? So it's always like there is goodness in the world instead of like there's evil in the world and we need to sit with that evil and figure out like what we need to do with it. But then as you point out, like if you believe that that the devil is actually everywhere, that then also leads you to think that like sex abuse is the work of the devil and people who are worshiping the devil.
Right. And I guess also it performs this important role, the moral panic classically, to exonerate mainstream culture, right? And to kind of push whatever sins it's committing onto the minority that you're trying to marginalize further. Where it's so interesting that one of the aspects of the panic that we get into as the show progresses is how it really pointed the finger quite frequently at women, and at queer women in some notable instances. And I don't know if you could say that anyone ever did this consciously, but kind of like the search for the textbook opposite of a white male patriarch. We're like, what if it was that lesbian over there?
Right. Not the most obvious person.
Yeah. What if it's the least obvious?
Support for today's episode of the Culture Study Podcast comes from Beam. All right, folks, some breaking news right off the top. Beam's cyber sale is now open for early access for my listeners, and it's their best offer of the year, but only for 48 hours. Right now, my listeners get up to 50% off, and with my code CULTURE, you can grab Dream for just $32.50. That breaks down to only $1.08 per night for the best sleep of your life. Go to shopbeam.com/culture, use my code CULTURE, and don't miss out. This is the lowest price Dream has ever been sold anywhere and will likely sell out quickly. So if you've listened to the show for a while, you know I talk about sleep all the time and trying to get better sleep and my sleep score. I like sleep because sleep makes me smarter. That is one of many reasons why I like sleep. And when I don't have sleep, I am a miserable person to be around and not as good on the podcast. And so I'm always trying to get better sleep. That's why I like Beam's Dream Powder. Dream is made with clean, science-backed ingredients like reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin, formulated to help you fall asleep fast, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. No grogginess, no crash, just deep restorative rest. And here's the best part. It actually tastes amazing. My favorite flavor is the brownie batter. It's smooth, delicious, and easy to make part of your nightly wind down. So if you've been waiting for the right time to try Dream, this is it. Go to shopbeam.com/culture, use code CULTURE, and get up to 50% off during Beam's cyber sale. You can grab Dream for just $32.50, but here's the catch. Dream is only available at this price until it sells out. So seriously, think about it. How much would you pay for a truly great night of sleep? With Beam's cyber price, it's just $1.08 per night. So go to shopbeam.com/culture now. Today's episode is sponsored by Aura Frames. Okay, Melody, you have a wonderful endorsement for Aura Frames. Tell me about it.
An Aura frame is the perfect way to showcase all of the photos that have just been living on your phone that you never look at. All of the photos that you would never think about framing, but when you look at them, you're like, oh, that's so nice. Examples from my Aura frame that are true. A picture of my favorite bookstore. A picture of an ice cream cone I had in Bar Harbor. A picture of Polly when she was in a really funny napping position. A picture of me and Bobby in front of a waterfall in Iceland that I wouldn't frame because you can see the selfie stick. And also my raincoat is tied very tightly around my face. But when my Aura frame cycles through these photos, they fill me with so much joy, and I'm so happy that I finally got them off of my phone.
So I love how like most of the appeal for a lot of people, they're like, oh my gosh, give this to your relatives. They can always have pictures of you. And you're like, give this to myself so I can always have pictures of me and the objects that I have encountered. I love it. It is such a great use.
So you download an app on your phone, the app connects to the frame, and then you can, what I've done is I've set up a special album in my photo app that the Aura app just scans. So it always knows if there's a picture in that folder, it should be on the frame. So I've like cut out all of the middle uploading steps. And if I'm just going through my phone for something, I'm like, oh, I really like that picture. I add it to my special album and then I see it on my frame later.
And I'll just say that this is a fantastic use case, a reason to get an aura for yourself, also a reason to get it for someone else. And I think it's especially good if you have relatives who are always asking for pictures of you or your kids or your dogs or whatever. Like, it just shows up. It's so easy. And it's not one of those like tech gifts where you give it to someone and then they're like, I can't deal with this, right? Like, you can set it up. It's actually very straightforward.
You can preload photos on it before you give it.
There's actually unlimited free photos and videos. So you just download the app and you can put anything into it. You have to be on Wi-Fi. It's very easy. And for a limited time, you can visit auraframes.com and get $45 off Aura's best-selling Carver mat frames, named #1 by Wirecutter, by using promo code CULTURE at checkout. That's auraframes.com, promo code CULTURE. This exclusive Black Friday Cyber Monday deal is their best of the year, so order now before it ends. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. We want to segue now into something that talks a little bit more about this understanding of power and like disciplining and performance and class status. And we're going to read 2 questions here. First, we'll hear a question from Ruth.
I would love it if you could discuss the relationship between white upper middle class parenting culture and moral panics.
And then Kelly has some additional thoughts, which Melody's going to read.
How much of social panics are around just trying to fit in with your desired class and virtue signaling? Oh, you read that article about how bad black plastic kitchen utensils are, so that's why you're frantically buying everything wooden? I, too, saw that article about how microplastics are getting to our babies from breast milk, and that's why we should only use glass containers. Did you know that Y brand is secretly racist, so we have to stop buying from them? Or at least those are the types of panics that go around my upper middle class, white educated circles.
I love this because I think sometimes we can, especially as like white educated liberals, get into this like, well, only like people who go to church all the time and are conservatives like would ever believe that Satan's doing something. But there are conspiracies that span the gamut of the political ideology. And I think that there is a lot of like, well, did you know about this? Well, you should hear about this. Like, and it does intersect with intensive parenting practices and bourgeois, I think, lifestyle practices. So I'd love to hear you go in any direction here.
Well, I mean, it makes me think of how kind of in sales, there's the tactic of like, you know, create pressure, create the sense that you have a very limited amount of time in whatever way. And so I feel like if you have, a baby or a young child, especially, you just, I think evolutionarily are geared toward treating any kind of threat with a greater degree of urgency, because the stakes are so incredibly high. Then like you have to do whatever you can to protect your child, and like entertaining something a little bit wacky for a little bit longer than he would in the past, like is nowhere near the most extreme thing that you could do if you had to do it. Again, I'm imagining this because I'm really stressed out enough just taking care of myself. Your awareness of the world and the ways that it can randomly hurt your child is, I think, for many parents kind of dizzying and overwhelming. And there are so many conceivable scary things to deal with. And especially, I think that we were also looking at in the satanic panic is this understanding that has certainly only, I think, increased in the years since, that like America was not really a good country to be a parent in anymore for many reasons, partly financially. And also, I mean, part of the reason people were nervous about daycare in the early 80s was because Reagan had just slashed federal funding for daycare. So suddenly there was this big gap where a lot of parents were sending their kids to just sort of like a house down the street and being like, well, I hope that works out. But we kind of had to figure that out really quickly. And we have fewer good options than we used to, but it'll trickle down. And so I think that there is something kind of nice too about believing in a far off distant threat, and that it kind of makes the up close threats of like, what if my baby chokes on something? What if my baby eats a button battery? What if my baby gets left face down at a daycare center that's taking care of too many kids and isn't run by Satanists, but is understaffed, which is something that Satanists could potentially help with, because if they have satanic magic, then maybe they could prevent
Replicate
SIDS, There's so many like everyday real world threats that I think I don't know, it's kind of like how I think it feels like to be like Mulder and Scully in the X-Files, where you're like, yes, I have to clean my gutters and mow my lawn, and the HOA is after me and all this stuff. But there's a Gill kid in Kentucky. We got to go see the Gill kid, Scully.
Yeah, no, it's very like, oh, what do we do with fascism? We like focus on skincare, like control what you can control, right? Like, so what do we do about the fact that like America is incredibly hostile to parents?
Mm-hmm. Make up something even more hostile to parents.
Or we focus on what we can consume, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So either you come up with a different thing to blame, other than like the government that we have built, or like just the entire foundation of like how we think about the family. So you come up with satanic panic or trans people in schools, or you focus on the fact that like, well, I could buy new spatulas, right? And prevent the massive ball of plastic from
Yeah.
Or like Montessori toys, or like, you know what I mean? Like all the different things that come into play here when we talk about
the plastic thing feels like a fit too. And I almost think there's like, the like people who are spending at least 50% of their waking hours trying to eliminate plastic from their lives. And then you have these jump scares where you're like, wait, I have a retainer and stuff, where it's like, the ability
I wear it
to
all
like,
night.
Right? You're like, well, that I might just be breaking even no matter what I do, but it's like the idea that I think that's kind of what Satanism is too in the satanic panic, where it's like, and again, in the 80s, this was not a politically polarized position, at least initially. And I think it was something that was driven by the cultural right and the cultural left kind of simultaneously to begin with, in a way that A, sped the plow, unfortunately, and B, made it seem like politically maybe we were breaking even. And then it did tilt eventually to the right. But for a long time, it just seemed like a very mainstream phenomenon. And I think that there was something very appealing potentially to everybody that transcended politics, of this idea that we could actually maybe eradicate child abuse. There was a sense of like, well, what if Satanists are kind of the ones doing it mainly?
Right.
And once we find these Satanists, we won't have child abuse anymore, which is a very appealing and impossible idea.
Yeah, because no one wants to think about the fact that it's just something that happens to people, right? That like people just do this.
And no one wants to think about the fact that, like, again, in this time of Reaganomics, it's like we would actually need to spend an unbelievable amount of money to try and offer people the kinds of resources that they need in order to leave abusive situations, to have the kind of mental health care that they need, both experiencing abuse and committing abuse. I mean, the nice thing about Satan as a threat is that he doesn't really demand federal funding.
Precisely it. And the sad thing about it, we're like, it's ridiculous and you have to laugh, but like the way it gets deflected onto people who are actually the most vulnerable, right? Like that's what,
which is like convenient.
Sucks over it. It's very convenient.
And and something that's interesting too, and we weren't even really able to get into this in this show because this is such a big story, really, but that later on we start with the daycare cases, and then this becomes a movement in therapy for adult women. And we start to have cases kind of more in the late 80s and early 90s that are not criminal, but civil cases where typically an adult woman has gone into therapy. She's had a therapist who's very attached to the idea, because it's very popular at the time, that any issues you might have as a woman, like, mild depression, eating disorder, anxiety, anything, that like actually women are just, we all have multiple personalities, and these multiple personalities were caused by sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And so, there are many cases of people suing a family member in civil court and accusing them of abuse, and also in many cases later recanting that and saying that they stopped the therapy and came to no longer believe it, that it was a belief that they had to put effort into sustaining, and that was kind of created through being asked to imagine being abused by various family members and seeing if any of those felt right, for example. This is a therapeutic tactic of the time. And so when the legal threat comes for people who have real financial and legal resources, and for people kind of verging into the upper middle class, suddenly it gets a lot less traction than it did when we were accusing and in quite a few cases bringing to trial just people who worked for generally very low wages and very long hours at daycare centers and didn't have the legal resources to adequately defend themselves a lot of the time.
Yeah. And also, like, just puts this spin on, like, what therapy does, what happens when you're trying to help, like, figure out why your life is hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and you're like, well,
Oh, yeah.
it just, like, leads people down, like, it's just bullshit. Like, this is not something that you should reach for. Like, if we ever want to think about why there are so many of our parents' generation is like, well, like, therapy is just like
Yeah.
what do they call it? Like a brain scrambler or whatever. Like, all of the
That does
history
make
is
it
there.
come into focus. Yeah, and also just kind of on all the sort of wacky pop therapy stuff in the 70s, like Est, where you're like, right, therapy was just like another way to abuse women for a long time, and it's always going to be vulnerable to that. There's also this idea in kind of peak satanic panic therapy that if you've had a lot of failed relationships with men, then that is an indicator that you've experienced satanic abuse, and it's like maybe it's men that are the problem.
Right. No, and that's like just that complete deflection instead of looking at like, oh, maybe it's the way that we have like conditioned men to treat women, like what dating culture is. Like there's just so many bigger picture things that you can look at, or you can just blame Satan. And I think that like right now, we got so many questions about screens. So like, are we in the midst of a moral panic about screen time? And I think that will, like 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, I hear people on both sides saying we will look back and either we will think the wide scale rapid adoption of screens is the worst thing that we ever did as a society. And like, this is a blip that we are going to spend like generations correcting. Or it's like, this is a long progression that we have been on for many, many decades. Like, this is just where we're marching towards. Like, this is not something that you should be panicked about.
Yeah. Man, I don't freaking know, honestly.
I know. That's why we didn't go there. I was like, I can't talk about AI. I don't want to talk about it.
I know. I've already brought it up. Let's stick with good old comforting Satan, because that is the nice thing about Satan, right? Like anything that you don't want to look close to home to try and solve. You're like, I think Satan did that. And it's like, surely something is our fault.
I mean, sometimes I do wish I had that like moral simplicity, right? Like sometimes I'm like, if I lived in 15th century like Christian culture, like I would just know it was always my fault, right? Like everything I did as a woman, it was just always my fault. I sinned and God was punishing me. The simplicity. Sarah, this has been everything that I dreamed of and more. Can you tell us where people can find you on the internet if they want to hear more from you?
Yeah. So you can find me and all of my thoughts about Satan on The Devil You Know. It's a podcast that I was so lucky to get to make for CBC Podcasts with my producer, Mary Steffenhagen. We talked to some amazing people whose lives were in some cases just absolutely destroyed by the satanic panic. And what we also tried to do is to not make this a downer, right? Because like you'll get depressed anyway learning about this. We don't have to try. And I think there are so many amazing, strong, good people who were seen as a threat simply because they tried to make the world a little bit better for themselves and the people that they cared about. And what I also hope is that listening to it will make you realize that being the victim of a moral panic, much like the one we're having now, is something that happens to people who I think often are inciting fear because of their capacity to love and forgive.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy to get to share it. And of course, I also am over at You're Wrong About, which is a podcast about misremembered history, and I would love to have you back on it. It's been way too long.
Yes, I'd love that. I would love that. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts because we have so many great episodes in the works, and I promise you don't want to miss any of them. If you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, go to our Google form at tinyurl.com/culturestudypod or check the show notes for a link. And if you want to support the show and get bonus content, head to patreon.com/culturestudy. It's $5 a month or $50 a year, and you'll get ad-free episodes, an exclusive advice time segment, and weekly discussion threads for each episode. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod.